Hi, my name is Rocco, and I'm the creator of Sigma Quotient. Now, if you've looked at the landing page, you'd already understand something about what Sigma Quotient is. And what we're going to be talking about today is one practice, something you can try to get the flavor of the kind of work I do and to see how these concepts and practices actually deepen your understanding of yourself, lift the hood on what is actually happening, the architecture and the building blocks and the furniture almost in the dark that we stumble into in our own psychology. So the practice today is called one voice at a time, excuse me. And I'm actually going to share the screen because it's going to be the best way I can explain to you what we're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. There you go. This should do the trick. So this practice is called one voice at a time, and let's just pop into a roll call here really quickly. So the one on top over here, the persona, the aspect of our conscious awareness, we call the conscious witness. But let's assume that one's not in the room all the time, especially when we're going through something like recursive thinking, when we're stuck, trapped in the same kind of thoughts, and we actually can't arrive at a point of solid, firm, locked in decision making where we keep going around in circles, coming back to the same point, having conversations in our head which we believe we've had before. What that usually implies is a lack of congruence in ourself and a lack of coherence. In other words, we're not speaking with one voice internally, and we're troubled perhaps in slightly different ways, and different parts of our psyche, different aspects of our nervous system, etc., are manifesting different intentionalities, and we're feeling torn in two or more directions at the same time. So a roll call here is, let's assume that we've got a conscious aspect of our conscious awareness and we've got a shadow aspect of our conscious awareness. Shadow is not evil or bad, it's just everything that is true about our experience that we perhaps aren't aware of. So the following persona that we have inside of our psyches is not something that one needs to bother clinically proving. It just becomes a useful model for how to understand the kind of internal chatter that we're always stuck with. So I've created 4 pillars here. One I call the child, the animal, the protector, and the judge. And to help you understand what's going on here, the child is not too dissimilar to what we mean when we say the inner child. The animal is what we call the soft animal. This is the nervous system and the basic physiological needs of our body and those appetites and impulses which control and feed those needs. And then what people call the monkey mind is actually made up of 2 persona here. The one is called the protector. That's the one that wants to keep us safe. And the other one is called the judge. And that's the one that wants to make sure everything is fair. Now, obviously, each of these have a shadow expression. So the child, when ignored or when not in a healthy expression, is called the wounded child. The animal has the beast. The protector becomes the critic, and the judge becomes the victim. And let's see how those persona show up. So in this exercise, the intention is to pay attention to one's own thought streams. And instead of going around in circles and identifying with the drama and the frustration of any of those voices, we kind of trying to separate ourselves back a step, almost like a parent listening to 4 squabbling children, or an arbitrator listening to 4 parties which can't arrive at consensus. So the child is the one in us that seeks attention, that seeks nurture, that seeks forgiveness, and that seeks acceptance. Those are universal needs for every single human. The animal is the one that wants to have its needs provided. It wants its primal needs respected, not denied, in other words, and it wants to know its clear place in the organization, in the social structure, in life, and in the organizations of our lives. As I said, the protector is the one that wants to avoid injury, it wants to avoid danger, it wants to avoid loss. And the judge is the one that seeks fairness or justice in our lives and wants to ensure that we have a sense of freedom that is unimpeded. Now, that's the ask that those four persona have of us. And when there is a failure to listen to or make room for that ask, the inevitable response then for the child becomes the wounded child, and its response is shame, attention seeking, tantrums, hiding, pretending, self neglect, and fantasy. And as adults, we don't have a steady stream of emotional wellness or psychological fortitude. We're sort of subject to a sine curve. We have ups and downs in all aspects of our life, and life hits us in different ways. So it's not that we constantly live in the state. Sometimes we're above the waterline in our good place, and sometimes we're drawn down into the shadow expression. And the trick is we don't know when, and we don't know when we cross over. And when we've crossed over, we don't know that we are there, and we don't have the tools or the means to pull ourselves out. So it's useful to recognize which each of these persona are so we can start a practice and tell them apart and start processing each of these voices individually. So the animal, when its ask is denied, becomes the beast. And it doesn't, it's the kind of behavior we recognize as forms of violence, excess, vigilance, and all of these things lead to anxiety and states of anxiety in our nervous system. Remember, anxiety is related to fear insofar as if we're afraid of something, we can say that fear has an object. There is something that we're afraid of. But anxiety is exactly the same sensation when there's no object. So we just internalize that and it goes around in circles. Now, when the protector, the one in us, in our conscience, in our sense of wisdom and our forms of structure and discipline and caution, fail in their ask, fail to avoid injury, fail to avoid danger, fail to avoid loss of some kind when we're experiencing what we perceive as a wound or as fear or as loss of some kind, we default into behaviors of guilt, self-blame, self-criticism, perfectionism, and controlling behavior. And if we care about somebody in a relationship or a team at work or children or a family, then our controlling behavior can actually extend unconsciously to them. Now, we all have experiences of our parents perhaps portraying some of these, or people at work perhaps portraying some of these behaviors towards us. And the final one, which is part of these two form like the monkey mind, the protector and the judge. The final one is the judge. And what the judge wants is fairness and justice and freedom. Now, when we're not feeling that something has been fair, when we're not feeling that the world is just, and when we're not feeling that we have a sense of freedom, if our freedom feels compromised, the response, the shadow response is blame. And you'll see the finger is pointing away, whereas the finger for the critic points at self, and the finger for the victim points away at someone else. So this is what we call an external locus of control, when we believe that we have less agency in our own lives, which is really what the Sigma Quotient is all about. It's how much sovereignty and how much agency do we believe that we have, and is that in alignment with reality? So when the judge feels that its ask has been denied, the response, the shadow response, is blame, spite, and an external locus of control. So let's explore this a little bit deeper. The voices, the catchphrases when you're listening to these voices is, if you notice the internal self-talk sounds like look at me or don't look at me, I am something wrong. That's the voice of shame that says I am something wrong, and the voice of guilt says I did something wrong. But if the voice says, look at me, or don't look at me, or I am something wrong, then we know it's the voice, the unheard voice of the child. If what we're facing is our sense of impulse, our sense of excess, our sense of vigilance, then that has no language per se, then we know that's the voice of the beast. And the unheard voice of the animal, in other words. If the voice that speaks our internal natterer is saying such things as, if they didn't want this, then they shouldn't have done that. This isn't fair. If it sounds like entitlement, if it sounds like disempowerment, it's the voice of the unheard voice of the judge, which we call the victim. And if the voice sounds like guilt or controlling, we can be sure it's the voice of the unheard voice of the protector, which is going to be the voice of the critic. And it will say things like, well, if you didn't want this to happen, then you shouldn't have done that. And it always believes that I did something wrong or someone else did something wrong. It's very concerned with the tell-off. So how do we bring this all together then? So what I've prepared for you is a practice. Now, I recommend that you do this every couple of days. And I recommend that you do it for at least a week. Otherwise, you won't really see the results. But honestly, even just sitting once and trying to capture each of those four voices, whether it's the conscious or the shadow expression, just hearing it out to its full will make an enormous difference to your understanding of the different persona that form your consciousness and your psychology. And also being able to develop that skill of presence in listening to it and being useful in alchemizing that message and applying whatever the request is as part of your decision making in terms of what you're going to do next and how you're going to show up for yourself. So just to pause for a second, if we think about something like meditation or yoga or breath work, these things are wonderful in of themselves and they center us. The point is that it's a technology that helps bring us back to center and brings us into the present moment, but we don't really have a means for safeguarding that sense of presence, and we easily get pulled off in a bad direction again. And when it happens, we don't realize it. And then secondly, when it happens, we don't really have a way of fixing the underlying problems. Now, yoga and breathwork and meditation are excellent technologies at arriving at that place of stillness wherein we can tap into this state of presence and hear and feel and sense and take an audit of what is happening internally within ourselves. But without upgrading our knowledge and our understanding, we're just relying on that tool inevitably and incessantly, and we're not actually developing mitigation strategies or internal management strategies. Now, that's not an intelligent way to budget your energy and attention and just keep relying on a worthy practice like yoga or breathwork or meditation to keep bringing you back to center. It's what you do once you are back at center. It's the remediation work, it's the upgrading and the upskilling and the debugging of the code that ends you up in the same sense of frustration, anxiety, derangement. So let's have a look at how to actually pull the practice together. So I'm going to jump back into the sharing again one last time. So what I want you to do is spend at least 5 minutes doing this journaling exercise. And as I said, I would recommend every couple of days for at least a week. Look, I do this still, and I recommend it to every single one of my clients. And this is a profound game changer. This changes everything for people because for the very first time, they're lifting the veil and seeing the truth about what is actually happening underneath the surface and finding ways to organize, sort, and hold space for all of that. And what you want to be doing is you want to be journaling and writing that stream of consciousness as a practice so that you can actually refer back to it and listen to yourself. And what you'll be hearing is, as you try to practice, you'll actually be hearing yourself talking over yourself. You'll hear that as you begin with the one voice, you think you're listening perhaps to the child, and it will be telling you what its concerns are. It will be telling you how it wants attention, nurture, forgiveness, or acceptance, or how it's struggling with self-neglect, pretending, hiding, and tantrums, etc. And while you're busy saying your truth, another voice will come over and say such things as well. If you didn't want this to happen to you, then you shouldn't have done that. Or other people have it worse. And when you are speaking against yourself in this way, you can be sure that you're not listening to one voice at a time. So you need to learn to tell them apart. So I would focus on that previous slide, this one over here, and I'll leave a link below this practice so you can find the PDF on the website. And if you're finding this from the landing page, then I'll make sure that the video and this PDF are both reachable for you. But you want to be well aware of those voices and which one is speaking, and whether it's actually the conscious expression or the shadow expression that's talking. You need to identify their language, and you need to learn their triggers, because what they'll be talking about and what they'll be raising has got to do with the way that you interact with the reality and the relationships and the circumstances of your life. And then each of those have triggering moments. Because if you can learn what the triggers are, you can learn to moderate, circumvent, and remediate those. The second thing you need to do is to be firm but fair. One voice at a time. You will catch yourself a dozen times in the beginning trying to say the truth, trying to be the witness for that thought stream, and realizing that there's two or three thought streams trying to clamor or talk over each other at the same time. And that's exactly the problem that we're trying to solve for. So the reason that you practice this is not just to hear the whole stream of truth, but to actually get better at hearing that stream of truth over time, so that eventually you won't need to journal this practice. You'll be able to just stop in a moment and process just almost a half a second with your eyes closed, or maybe ask for a pause in a difficult moment, clear your cache, and just take stock of what voices are speaking, what triggers are coming up, and connecting that with a context that you've learned from doing this practice. Now, each voice may speak, but it's not that each voice has to speak. And you also don't need to force a voice, because that's not exactly what the conscious witness, that you as the conscious witness, is trying to embody. And finally, other voices, as we've said, will speak up and will need to be assured that they will get their turn. You need to see yourself as a very fair mediator between a bunch of aggrieved petitioners, a bunch of aggrieved parties that all have something meaningful to say. And all of their wounds, no matter how silly it might seem to the protector in you, to the sensible one in you, you must understand that these are forms of sacred truth that we need to make space for. And we need to treat them as sacred. You need to understand that sometimes everything that emerges is not always going to be coherent in a language sense, that the feelings and emotions and the forms of expression that, for example, the child and the animal have are not always going to track and make a lot of sense. And you need to be patient with that. You need to imagine sometimes that you are speaking with a child, or you are watching the body language or the behavior of an animal. And if you truly care for them and you're trying to help them and hold space for them, you can't be doing perhaps what your parents and your so-called leaders did by peppering you with questions and pointing a finger and saying how ridiculous things are. You just have to make space for it. And the best way to do that is to, like, what I call pouring warmth into the problem, creating spaciousness so that there is a sense of easing and unwinding that can happen, and more of that context can flow through, and you capture whatever you can in your journal. You need to listen from love, not from fear. A lot of shame for you is going to come up. A lot of guilt is going to come up. A lot of confusion is going to come up. And we're going to catch ourselves trapped in each of those persona by accident when we're doing this journaling exercise. And if you're not catching yourself and bringing yourself back to this calm-centered, holding space role that you're trying to embody, you're going to slip into fear, and you're going to worsen the project, not improve the project. And remember, what we're aiming for here is to increase, develop, our Sigma Quotient. And that means facing discomfort. Fear is not danger. Fear is not danger. And pain is not injury. And discomfort is not loss. Now, you need to treat danger like danger for sure, but not all fear is danger. You need to treat an injury as you would expect, but not all pain is actually injury. And if there is loss or there is threat of loss coming, you have to respond to that sanely and responsibly. But pure discomfort is not necessarily loss. And being able to tell the difference between those two, between fear and danger, between pain and injury, and between discomfort and loss, is the beginning of discernment, wherein we can actually marshal, curate, and safeguard our Sigma Quotient. I forgot to mention the animal speaks via impulse, via excess. This is our vices, our addictions, and our vigilances. So I'm going to get back now to listening from love, not from fear. And the final thing is just a skill that you need to understand internally with yourself and with other relationships, is that trauma is not objective. Trauma is subjective. There doesn't have to be an objective measure for whether something that happened or is happening warrants appropriate compassion or space or understanding. That way of thinking is exactly how we got here in the first place. And what we're trying to do in terms of growing and developing our Sigma Quotient is separating out the operating system of what is deserving and what isn't deserving, and what we should think like and how we should operate and how we should believe. Separating that out, qualifying, testing, challenging that, and making sure that the code base that we integrate as our operating system, emotionally, psychologically, ethically, etc., is something that actually resonates profoundly and authentically with ourselves. Now, that's a project that takes a long time to do. We can't read about it in a book. It's something we have to get to over time. And this exercise, one voice at a time, very specifically requires us to suspend that responsive, quick, easy judgment that we inherited from other people, which is exactly what landed us in the circumstance that we have at the moment. If one of those voices wants to speak and wants to unpack a whole bunch, day after day after day, you have to listen day after day after day. There is eventually a wisdom you can learn when enough is enough, or you might actually get fatigued and might say, okay, I'm going to park this now and we can come back to it tomorrow. But then you have to show up and you have to come back to it tomorrow. You have to show up like the leader that you respond to in life. You have to be the leader that you would follow out of love, if that makes sense. So that's it really for the practice. All I can say is if you'd this makes a profound difference to any effort that you have in terms of marshaling your own consciousness, managing your own mental health and wellness. I often say that what we think of as mental health is actually a form of poor spiritual health. And what I mean by spirituality is not that it's something that we have to put our heads together and wear beads around our neck. I'm not taking the mick out of that. I'm just saying that the kind of spirituality I'm talking about doesn't need to look like it looks on Instagram. It is just a sense of connection and sacredness that we have to our own life, to our own forms of gratitude, our own forms of belonging in our life, our own way of holding the conversation of life and of being in this world in a way that can't necessarily be prescribed by other people. It's all those things that we care about: connection, belonging, vitality, imagination, creativity. And it's how we derive our sense of purpose and meaning in this world. That's what I mean. So if those things are important to you and you can see the connection between arriving at those things and developing your Sigma Quotient, if you can see how a Sigma Quotient gets you closer to those outcomes, then this is an excellent practice for you. I hope you have fun with it because you learn a lot about yourself. And if you want a little bit of extra guidance and tutoring in this, then reach out to me and you will be able to find a booking link for getting time with me, or simply, send me an email and leave me a comment about this because I'd like to hear what you have to say. But that's it, and have fun with this and let me know what you think. Take care.